Let's get started. Thank you so much for being here. I see colleagues and students and friends. We really appreciate it. Welcome to our WGS Intersections panel on Raheleh Filsoofi's exhibit. This is one of my favorite events on campus. In collaboration with the Halsey, WGS invites affiliate faculty from different disciplines to have a conversation to share their insights and ideas about the exhibit. And between the four of us today, we'll be intersecting visual studies, literary criticism, history, and geosciences. Given the importance, and I hope this will become clear in our conversation, the importance of land to Filsoofi's exhibit and her allusion to invisible histories, I want to open by acknowledging that we are on the traditional lands of the first people of Charleston, the Ituan, the Kiowa, Edisto Natchez Cuso, the Santee, the Wasamasa, also known as Bernardtown Indians. We acknowledge and honor all of the indigenous people who lived, labored, and were faithful stewards of the lands. We express our deep gratitude for the lands and the continued faithful stewardship to the next 7 generations. We also acknowledge the lives and labor of the Africans who were enslaved to build Charleston, South Carolina. On the College of Charleston campus, African and African-descended people use skilled labor in ornamental ironwork, historic architecture, and low-country agriculture and food production. We acknowledge the Black lives and labor that built our city and campus. So with that, I'm Cristina Garcia, Associate Professor at the Department of Hispanic Studies, soon to be Director of Women and Gender Studies. Thank you. AC. I'm also affiliate faculty with Latin American and Caribbean Studies and African American Studies programs, and a very proud member of the Halsey Advisory Board. On our panel, I am thrilled to introduce Nadia Avendaño, my colleague from the Department of Hispanic Studies, also a WGS and LAX affiliate. Dr. Avendaño is the scholar of Latinx and Chicanx literary works and the director of the Spanish as a Heritage Language Distinction Program. To her left is Ranat Mikati from the History Department. Dr. Mikati is the author of Creating an Islamic City, Beirut, Jihad, and the Sacred, and is currently co-authoring a book with Garrett Davidson on the Egyptian manuscript dealer Amin al-Kanji. And to her left, we have Tim Callahan, Professor of Geology and Environmental Geosciences, who is also serving as Interim Dean of the Graduate School. Dr. Callahan's research contributes to the understanding of hydrology and water resources. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. So typically, our panels are held in the very galleries of the Halsey. But this fall's 2 exhibits, Kenny Wynn's The Divine Eye and Raheleh Filsoofi's At the Edge of Arrival, occupy the space with silk and ceramic. Once we enter the museum, we are enveloped in their installations. Silk and ceramic are materials with very ancient histories, and we tend to associate them with touch, craftsmanship, and utility. Qualities not associated with old school high art, which assumes this distance and disinterested contemplation. So we're limited by time. We've devoted our panel to Filsoofi's work, but I wanted to preface our conversation with reference to the tactile materiality that both artists insist on, because it reminds us of our entanglements and it collapses the distance between the artifact and the viewer and the past and the present. Raheleh Filsoofi's exhibit is a multimedia, multisensorial installation. We are drawn first by a soothing soundscape that invites us to walk through a hallway into an enclosed space. A book of poetry, dust paintings, ceramic vessels, and video panels are some of its contents. Filsoofi describes herself as an itinerant and social practice artist, and the assemblage of these different medias gestures towards a process, an ongoing one. As part of the book display, and perhaps you've already seen a slide of it, but as part of the book display, you'll see a collection of glass vials containing soil. Rather than use commercial clay, Filsoofi produces her own. And in discussions of her work, she underscores how the clay she uses comes from soil collected from each place she's traveled to in the United States. So she digs, processes, isolates, and archives the soil, which she describes as both medium and metaphor to explore migration, memory, and land. Dr. Callahan, so just a few days ago, you had the chance to see Raheleh dig in action. Could you speak to the labor and logistics in this process? And, most of us aren't attuned to appreciate the distinctions of soil, and especially when you see the ceramic pieces, like once those differences for us become sort of erased. And so we might incorrectly assume dirt is dirt. But she describes clay as having bodies, which also suggests maybe agency and certainly layers of imperceptible histories. So could you speak to the significance of soil and the field trip?
Well, of course, and thank you, Christina. Thank everyone for coming and your attention and interest. You wanna? Oh, thank you. All right, can you hear me a little better? Thank you, Christina. Really happy to be part of this panel. Looking forward to the discussion. It was a wonderful experience, a beautiful day. Weather was very much like today. And we went to Stone Oak Preserve, which is about 17 miles south on Savannah Highway in Hollywood, South Carolina. And this is a property just a little bit less than 1,000 acres, which is a very vast space. And we went to a few particular spots on that property to look for clays. And what was interesting in the conversation leading up to this field trip, we had Raheleh with us, and we're emailing back and forth about strategizing and logistics and make sure that her time was as efficient as possible. And then we invited along several students, studio art students, who were wonderful. And Dr. Susan Klein described them as tough and resilient. And I still have some dirt under my fingernails from when we were doing all our digging, and I bet they do too. And we walked around the property and just got to know it by listening to the birds and smelling whatever was on the air and feeling the wind and enjoying the great sunshine. But when you look down to the ground, you tend to just watch your 1 foot in front of the other, assuming that everything underneath is uniform. And that is certainly not the case. And in fact, it was a little bit of a trick to find the clays on the property, because around here, those of you who have dug in the backyard to start a garden or something like that, is very sandy pretty much everywhere. And what's interesting about the artwork, as I understand it from Raheleh, is that she does not amend the materials, but she actually removes some things and processes the clay, the soil material, to get to the essence of the clay material, which then becomes the ceramic or becomes whatever the material is that she adds to a medium. And that was a fascinating process to watch that, and the students got to benefit from that as well, which is wonderful to see that. But then what struck me was, again, thinking of space and time. And I feel as a geologist, I have a little bit of a superpower. I have an ability to imagine millions of years ago and what was in this exact place so long, long ago. And then also what's to come as our environment is changing. And then also to think about, too, what was there and who was there before us. So I really appreciate you for your acknowledgement of land and people. I think that's extremely important, and we tend not to think too much about that, as we're very self-centric beings, of course. But what I found is she also then pulled us back after the demonstration and using the clay material and doing the artwork. We all stood in a circle and one hand on a shoulder and our other hand on our heart and just closed our eyes and contemplated and thought about where we were at the moment. And that really was a powerful moment to think about yourself and your feet and rooted on the land and your neighbor. Some of those folks I had just met and was very fortunate to make some new friends and acquaintances. And what were they experiencing? And trying to get that feeling and shared experience in a way that in our busy day-to-day lives, we don't tend to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I love the way that you framed it first with as you're walking, right? That you're just looking down and it's sort of imperceptible or the ground seems sort of homogeneous and we're not attuned to those differences. And I'm so glad that you referenced your relationship in terms of space and time, because I think about as a geologist that's something that you would have a much more expansive sense. And I think that her work draws attention to that in different ways by insisting on looking or being attuned to the imperceptible. She has these paintings that she makes with dust, right? Something that's so tiny and ephemeral. So she's, I feel, expanding our sense of what's meaningful. I wanted to ask you, in engaging with her, also, you said the art students were there. Were any of your environmental or geology students also there on the field trip?
I had one, fortunately, that was able to join.
Okay.
And the studio art students were all majors and all very accomplished. And yeah, I thought that was extremely important for the entire experience because introductory students, we want to get them engaged and excited about whatever the particular activity or the discipline is. Sometimes the challenge I've found, and maybe other faculty instructors and so on, you found the same thing, is how do you excite someone or inspire them when they're not sure what is on the other side of that first initial step? But these students were very much engaged and ready to go out there again and again, or take what they learned to whatever place and location and activity that they are passionate about. One thing I wanted to think about too with respect to spatial scale, time scales are vast, but spatial scales are vast too, and it's hard to think about where we are. But let's zoom in on the very microscopic, to your point about the dust, where Raheleh takes dust and it's clay soil. She strips out everything that's not the clay particles, and then it dries that and makes the dust and then does stencils onto a particular medium, paper or otherwise. But just look at your fingertip. And I need glasses to do this these days. But I can imagine I have the whorls of my fingerprint on my finger. And a piece of sand, what we call very fine sand, we have sort of semi-quantitative descriptors of how big the particles are in sand. And in what we call very fine sand, one of those sand grains would fit in between the ridges on your fingerprint.
Wow.
And then we talk about clay, it is about 100 to 500 times smaller, each particle, compared to that. So if you've ever dealt with dry clay dust, it gets on you and it's very sticky and it just becomes a mass and is amorphous. What I love about one of the things of the artwork that Raheleh does is that she leans into that characteristic. And in fact, that's a critical element of her using it in her work.
Yeah, that's fantastic. One final question, and then I'll let you pass the mic. Has engaging in her work brought you to think about or relate to your own work or geology or soil differently and how you might communicate that to your students?
We talked about that a little bit with Dr. Klein. In fact, it came up. What was my relationship with clay soil? I said it's very much a nuisance because if you're digging a hole or you're trying to install a water well, it takes a long time to dig through that. But that's the good stuff for the artwork. And so fortunately, we were able to find it fairly quickly. but it got me to stop and think about what other values, what other purposes, what other material properties, these materials that I've been taking for granted for a long time. It was good, kind of a reset in that sense.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, Dr. Mikadi, there are a lot of connections that I want to draw between your academic work and your former training as an archaeologist. But first, I want to acknowledge that there are some biographic connections between you and the artist. Raheleh identifies herself as a Middle Eastern immigrant woman navigating the American South. So can you speak to some of your shared experiences and what aspects of the exhibit resonated with you?
Yeah, I mean, when you first asked me whether I would be interested in participating in this, and kind of looked up her biography and how she describes herself, I kind of felt a sense of kinship because yes, there's at the superficial level, at just the mere kind of yes, I'm a Middle Eastern woman who came to this land reluctantly or not, but who made it her home, and who comes from a part of the Middle East where growing up, we both experienced violence and war in a way that would have shaped her life and mine, and kind of created a different maybe connection and reaction to land and belonging. But that's obviously at just the surface level. There's also issues of, as an immigrant to this land, learning the land and its history, and accepting your presence in it and being at peace with it when there's a kind of that aspect to it too. And so when I went through the exhibit, I kind of already had that in mind as I was walking through it, and maybe started seeing things that maybe I wouldn't have seen otherwise, or maybe that aren't there, but the emphasis on poetry, the poetic language, kind of resonated, because whether it's an Iranian culture or Arabic speaking culture, the language of poetry is still potent in a way that maybe I'm wrong, but my experience here has been that poetry has lost some of its power as a language or as an art here. And so seeing that her art incorporates that, the other aspect of it too is, and that I found fascinating, and as you were asking how it affects your thought about your work, her creating manuscripts and writing on manuscripts with clay, kind of also spoke to me about the importance of manuscripts in Islamic tradition. The shift to print in the Muslim world and acceptance of print as a technology came later. And in the Western world, when scholars look at that shift, the question is always why is it, and the interpretation is rigidity, conservatism, like lack of acceptance of new technologies. And as I looked at what she's doing, it made me understand that actually manuscripts as a written object have a different resonance and are valued as a repository of people in a way that the printed object is not. And so that actually kind of was personal because of how the history of manuscripts is usually kind of portrayed as kind of like a kind of that Islamic world was further back on the evolutionary scale from manuscript to print, but also as a scholar. Personally also, and that's something we've discussed, the sound aspect of her installations. Because as you said, it's serene, it draws you in. And I kind of wondered about her own experience as someone who's like mine, who comes from a place with serenity, birds, the sounds of the urban landscape, but also explosions, fireworks that don't mean the same thing as it means to the rest of the people around. And so that kind of aspect, like, so this draws you in, but would she have, if it was about Tehran, let's say, would it have been different? And if I were to try to replicate this about Beirut or Lebanon, what would the sounds be?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you underscore two things that I find fascinating. One, the materiality of text, right? She also was very careful about the paper that she selected, and the paper is also handmade, and you can tell that it has this really beautiful texture. So I also really love the idea of materiality of text, because then it also makes us aware of the materiality of language. Even when it is in print, it has that sonority. But yes, there's something very tactile. And then the sonorous, that when you're in that space, it really it gives you, it's a visceral experience, and it kind of moves you, right? It sort of opens you up to different memories. Thank you for that. And I think it ties in well also with your work. In your introduction to creating an Islamic city, when you describe the challenges of writing this history, I found really powerful connections with her process. And you write, I'm going to quote you, the book represents a methodological experiment that attempts to write a historical narrative for a place largely forgotten by the medieval and modern historical records. It's a rescue history of early Islamic Beirut, digging for fragments in the face of irremediable loss, end quote. And so I also thought, as a former archaeologist, you have also sifted through soil looking for history. Raheleh does not unearth vessels or even shards, right, to piece together. But in sifting and in archiving soil, she's attending to narratives and to ancestors where others might only perceive, right, like a homogeneous, unhistorical ground. And from that, she creates those vessels. So can you speak more to that connection?
Definitely. I mean, so the first thing you see, I kind of like circled it here as you're saying, dirt is dirt. And I thought that the dirt is not dirt. Because as an archaeologist, your first thing you're trained with is that dirt is not just dirt. And that in the process of excavating for the past, as you're working through the soil is a record of people. The people who moved the soil, who moved through the soil, who amended the soil. And so you learn to read it.
Yeah.
To look for texture, for color, for changes, and to try to interpret that, to kind of bring the people back to life.
Yeah.
The same for, and this is where like the ceramic aspect, as I was telling you, I'll just say it, where I can look at the vessels behind us. My instinct as an archaeologist is like, why is it whole? I need to smash it. This aside. So I can, at the cross section, understand it, because then the vessel is a conduit for the people who may, the people who dug for the clay, who amended the clay, who shaped the vessels, who fired them, but then also the people who bought them and used them and then smashed them and left them in the earth for us to find.
Yeah.
So for me, she's kind of creating these, and we are using that record to kind of create the history of the people who are silent and forgotten. And so obviously it's fragmentary, and you have to kind of dig for these fragments. So yeah, definitely there's kind of resonances as an archaeologist when it comes to soil ceramics, looking for the ghosts of ancestors. And so it's even as I work as an archaeologist in Beirut, I'm digging in my city. It's my hometown. So I'm knowing as I'm working through the soil that I'm kind of working through the soil where my ancestors are buried, where they lived, where they worked. So kind of there's these connections, but there's also the other bit, the manuscript connection due. As I now shift my work to studying Islamic manuscripts that ended up in Western collections. These are objects that traveled, that somehow emigrated from the places where they first belonged and found their way here. And so actually looking through the manuscripts, looking at the ink, looking at the traces of the people on the manuscripts and the fragments that they left kind of parallels a little bit the work that Raheleh does. So kind of these are in terms of my intellectual journey, the kind of the parallels and the aspects of her work that really were me.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I think there's an aspect. I'm thinking, well, there's connections, right? Like between the work of the geologists and the work of the archaeologists. You're trying to see something where sort of hegemonic or conventional site doesn't see anything, right? Where it's just sort of a blank canvas, and this training and this attunement to try to find something there. But then also there's just, I think, this meditative aspect, like the way that Raheleh had everyone take a moment, right? Just to sort of to contemplate it, to consider, right, all those layers, like all that history that is there. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we're good. Okay, Dr. Avendaño, like Dr. Mikati, I also suspect that Raheleh's exhibit resonated with you personally. And so I wonder if you want to speak to that first. And I, of course, want to make connections between your research and teaching on Latinx texts and immigrant experiences.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. Yeah, this is a wonderful discussion. So, yeah, on a personal level, definitely, I'm not an immigrant, but as a Chicana, as a Latina in the United States, I definitely, her work resonated with me. I'm a first generation born Chicana. I grew up in California, in Sacramento, an area where the Southwest was at one point Spanish territory, and then part of Mexico for a few years. And yet, although we have, my city is Sacramento, and all the cities surrounding us were all Spanish names, that erasure of the Mexican Spanish was, I mean, quite startling, right? So we all, even though I might have spoken Spanish, nobody pronounced the names. They all said Vallejo and Sahama, well, Palviga, hello, and we would just reproduce that, and so there was this very very strong erasure of history, and I don't know how I came to be very, I guess, just attuned to seeing those histories that were either marginalized or obscured or erased. I think my dad had a little bit to do with it. Being from Sacramento, the Sutter Mill where gold was discovered was nearby. And my father would always tell me as a child, it was not John Marshall that discovered gold. It was a Mexican rancher or Mexican farmer. And, I'm little, I don't pay much attention to it, but that really stuck with me. And so I began to be very interested in in finding these marginalized or silenced voices. And in college, of course, when I first took my first intro to Chicano studies, that's sort of where I became, exhilarated and started, really searching for those, those other histories. So in that way, when you asked me if I was interested, and I looked to see, what Raheleh's exhibit was about and how she, she talks about these invisible histories and positions herself as an immigrant in the U.S. I thought, yeah, I'm interested. Good, but hopefully that explains on the personal level.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. So you mentioned the Southwest, and in your reading of texts from the Southwest, you underscore how Chicanx experience is marked by othering and subalternity, even though, right, most Chicanos are not immigrants. Their families have been in the Southwest for generations. And so in an article on Stella Pop Duarte's Let Their Spirits Dance, you explore how in the pilgrimage to certain U.S. monuments and sites of memorialization lies another more ancient pilgrimage, such as that to Aztlan, the mythical land of the Aztecs, what today is the southwest region of the U.S., a result of settler colonialism. When Raheleh gestures to the imperceptible or illegible stories embedded in the soil and tiles her exhibit at the edge of arrival, it seems her work would powerfully speak to like a Latinx imaginary.
Yeah. So first, for those, especially the students that don't know what Aztlan is, this became this mythical homeland of Chicanos. Was a cornerstone to the Chicano civil rights movement. Again, as Chicanos in the U.S. as a sort of marginalized community, they were looking for roots, for a homeland, much like Raheleh's exhibit, I believe, is an attempt to belong, right, to find a connection with this land. And so Aztlan, yeah, I believe is that attempt for Chicanos to find their roots, their origins. And so at the edge of arrival, when I saw the title, I thought, oh gosh, yeah, this really speaks to Latinos or to Chicanos and their sense of feeling as perpetual foreigners, right? Where they're almost American, but not quite, right? And so at the edge of arrival, I saw it as this almost or this becoming or this or this liminal existence, neither here nor there. And I'm not sort of going a little in circles here, but yeah, I thought that title also resonated with some of the writers that I work on that also talk about this idea that they're perpetual foreigners. And I believe, right, the importance of land and the need to connect with the land is what Raheleh is searching for, which I said. But her work counters this erasure of marginalized voices and histories, and it gives her a sense of belonging as well as all other voices, which she in her poetry she discusses some of those voices.
Can you speak to some of her poetry? Yeah, it's so beautiful. If you could, yes,
I loved her poetry. It is, if you get a chance to go through the clay dust poems, right? They're beautiful. So she has a few quotes, right? I believe it definitely is a work, a journey towards healing. In her poetry, it reflects her need to create this archive, which is in the form of poetry and art as well, because as you mentioned, right, she is also creating, or well, you mentioned it. She's creating both literature and aesthetic art, or yes, in time, and she's sort of bridging the two. And I feel like she really wants to.
The poetry is in clay. Yeah.
And then, sorry, in dust. It's and she includes also some visual illustration and the illustrations as well with the clay dust. So that's incredible. She has a few. Well, there's one aspect of her poetry. It's one of the poems is titled "To Dave the Potter," and she's referring to an enslaved African American from the 19th century known for his beautiful pottery. I did not know anything about him, so I was very ignorant on this this person. So I interpreted it as Raheleh, inviting us to unearth, these marginalized voices, these histories, these historical figures that we don't know anything about. So I learned that he also adorned his pottery with poems, which I thought was short poems. And so she makes this poetic connection between the two. And I'll just give you a quote from this poem to Dave the Potter. I quote, "You carved in clay, I write in dust. We both speak through mud on the same land that never belonged to us." So she really positions herself in solidarity with the forced migration of enslaved peoples that arrived here to Charleston. So I think that's her way of bridging time and other voices that she can connect to. I just thought that was
I'm so sad to have that. That's so beautiful.
because I even wondered, and I don't know, I'd love to know if Dave the Potter is. I'm not from Charleston, obviously, so I don't know if he's well known to the average Charlestonian. So you guys visit the Charleston Museum. Yeah. Okay. So that was ignorance on my part, and I just thought that was beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
And that solidarity seems to be also in terms of unbelonging, right? Which is why she's always like questioning. And you were talking about that in between. Like she really wants to sustain, like hold that in between.
Definitely. And I'll just finish with because let's go ahead. One more comment that has to do with that desire to belong. She ends the her poetry with this final poem, always in the state of unarrival at its edge, yet this land knows me by the weight of my longing. So the way that I interpret that is that her longing to belong is so obviously so strong that is what sort of gets her to the edge of arriving at this place. So again, it's beautiful. I love it, and it was very short, concise poetry, but beautiful.
Yeah, no, but he's incredibly talented. And I love the way you mentioned the reference, the land has agency, right? Like the land is a subject. Yeah. And so she also, when she talks about her work and talks about the different mediums, she talks about them as collaborating. So there's also, and she also talks about how she's limited by the mediums themselves. So since the clay is different, the clay will also determine. So even though you might look at the ceramic pieces and you're like, I can't really tell the difference, but in making that, it determines like what kind of work she can make. So I like that there's a lot of agency in the material and in the land. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. All right, so I have a question for the panel, and then we're gonna open it up to you guys. It kind of simple but not uncomplicated, which is I guess, what do you see as especially politically impactful And I want to matizarlo, right? When I say political, not in a sort of explicit or blunt kind of way, but I think anytime that we're invited to rethink like what matters or have a different relationship to the world around us, that in itself is a very provocative political act. So what were some of the ways that you might have appreciated that sort of sense, that political impact?
I'll just briefly say I think I kind of already mentioned it. Really, for me, the political was to invite the viewer to look at this place, this space, and differently, right? And to be more cognizant of the history that is here in Charleston, that's connected to the land, the peoples from the past, and to sort of bring that to the present, right?
Yeah.
To just teach us how to do that every day and everywhere and with everyone.
And then it doesn't go away.
Right.
The past, it's still there. Yes.
Yeah.
Very important.
Actually, that's something I was thinking about as you were speaking is this idea of always being on the edge of arrival. That's kind of on the personal / political level. As an immigrant, I always felt the sense of not quite belonging here in this land, but also not quite belonging anymore, varying in the other land. But coming to the realization that that's okay.
Yeah.
And that no one actually ever belongs to the lands that they arrive to, that we're always, all of us, at the edge of arrival. So kind of that's dawned on me as I was looking at her work and kind of going through it as a traveler, that we are not just me, but all of us are travelers here.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
That really sits with me as well as the transiency, the temporary nature of things. But soil is old. The geologic realm is very, very old. And people in a transient way come to interact with it for growing crops, to sustain themselves, their communities, just for example. And it also sits with me too of not belonging to any one place as we migrate from one area, one land to another, but constantly having a pull back to where you came from and recognizing the importance is you shouldn't ever forget where you came from. I think everyone should take note of that. What we were doing in the field last Friday was some version of that, but I think more importantly was us trying to connect, or at least imagine a connection back to all the other people thousands of years prior who had been there for various purposes, driving, suffering,
Right.
everything in between. That was very impactful. And then to be exposed to what I considered soil as being something to deal with, and agency, it had incredible value in an artistic way that I had never imagined. Really brought it all the way around for me.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And we have time for questions. So I can pass the mic. Yeah, you can do that. Okay.
Um, Thank you for discussing, and it's very interesting to me, especially digging into historical, geological, Hispanic aspects is very new to me. And actually, I like the aspect of kinship in this exhibit. Uh, I'm from, I'm a exchange student here. So I'm from Japan, so I was not so familiar with kinship aspects in Western culture, so I thought it's very important. And then I would like to ask all of you professors, like, what, uh, what find, what did you find interesting in this panel discussion, like especially discussing in different aspects of your field? Yeah.
Thank you for that question. Yeah. We want to.
I start. Okay. Yeah. All right. What I found very interesting was to me, a brand new process. I think being exposed to new ways of looking at things and seeing how work can be made. That really struck me too as we were driving to the site on Friday. I had the pleasure of going with Dr. Klein and one of her students, and they were talking about what's next for that student. And the phrase was, go somewhere that you can make work. And I've never thought about work as something to make. Obviously not an artist. But I thought that was very eye-opening to me. And then also to have the opportunity to see Raheleh and how she made her work in a process that was completely new to me. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I was just going to say I would have loved to have gone. Yeah, exactly. And also would love to ask Raheleh some of these questions that we're answering for her. And I'd love to go on an archaeological too with you. That it just sounds so fascinating. Yeah. So that
I mean, that's kind of from my perspective is that I would have loved to kind of be able to have that conversation with her about making the making the silence speak, whether through art or through history, using the soil, and also it kind of walking through the exhibit, listening to her explain her exhibit, kind of wondered what I can do that would help me make the silence speak more. Thinking about soundscapes, thinking about the soil differently. So there's kind of definitely that aspect to it.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Okay, many things going on through my head. I would say what I appreciate, I think first in terms of what I appreciate about the installation itself, and I mentioned this before, was that how it really creates sensations. And it doesn't, sometimes you never really have that distance. It's never really there, but we might perceive it. We might see ourselves as more passive, and we look at something and we process it and we see it as more of like a medium of communication. Like, what was that about? What can I take away from that? And that's never actually really the case. But her installation is very emphatic about that, right? So it's really about once you're in there, it becomes an experience and it becomes a process. And a lot of the things that we've said about how it alludes to narrative or ancestry, all of these things, they're never really explicit. But when you look at all of the different elements, right, because it's like an assemblage, it's all together, it's the combination, the configuration of what those things produce that lead you, right, that provoke these different thoughts and these sensations. And in terms of like making, you say like mix, I love that. We also talk about when we think of like literary text or visual work, we think of it as a form of world making, right? Like you're making world. And so this conversation, right, by having this panel and it generating and being able to give each other ideas, and from that generate other thoughts. All of that is sort of furthering that, and I think that's very cool, very exciting. Yeah, thank you for that question.
This a lot.
Yeah.
Can I ask about the assemblage? I'm looking at that. So if there were glass on top of the springs, what do you think you would get or lose by the disconnection? Or if it were a reprint and not actually in clay, what do you think you would get or lose? Because you mentioned it's not just communication, he's past that. So I'm wondering, like, what are the non-communicative effects of a particular part of the assemblage that seem to speak to y'all most?
So I would say that what's most powerful is precisely all of the non-communicative effects, right? Like there's so much language.
Yeah.
Pardon?
I'm looking at like the fades in the font.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But in terms of you saying like, oh, like, what if the glass was
Yeah, like, what if there was separation, or what if it were a reprint, or what if it were printed on a postcard?
oh yeah, you would lose. Yeah, you would lose so much because there's I mean, and these are great pictures, by the way. I mean, you really get like a fine grain, but it is still a different experience seeing it in person. But as far as the assemblage, it's just I guess yeah, the combination of having the configuration of then having it's also the juxtaposition of different medias, right? Because then there's text and then there's like ceramic, so it's in that sort of configuration that then generates, I think, like these different sensations and thoughts. But yeah, that's the extent that I can, you know. Oh, I see Alyssa.
Hi, Elita. So, thank you all so much. It's a wonderful conversation. So, Dean and your meetings.
All right, thank you all. Boo. I guess I'm so struck by the materiality aspect of this. And as someone who comes from a place where soil is really important, I come from a farming place, but it's a place I'm also very disconnected from now for lots of reasons. And the feeling of not belonging, but yet the soil and it's something about that being important and being sort of transplanted to a place that is not my history, and grappling with the history of the place, which I think many of you have sort of referenced, that, you know, and she moved to this place and also comes, you know, grappling with both the histories of her own place and the new place. And I feel like there's some sort of conversation there that's happening. But I also feel like I'm so struck by the archiving of the soil, because I feel like part of what she's doing, and I wonder, and maybe this is something for Rana to contemplate for me with your history and your background, which is in what way is this also not just the archive of the people who were lost, right? Not just the past, but for the people of the present whose history was stolen. So if you weren't allowed a family history or your own archive, or nobody archived you, your peoples, your ancestors, then like the connection of those people to the soil and all the various ways that they were connected to it is somehow, right? Like the archive, the family history of people in the present from whom that has been taken. Does that make any sense? So I feel like the materiality, the materiality aspect of the dirt is not just dirt, because there's people and history in it. It's not just that we can read the dirt, but it's that they are the people's representation somehow. Maybe I'm open.
I mean, I feel like it's partially she is archiving
The soil, and so the people.
Yeah.
That's, at least from my perspective, working on Beirut, where thousands and thousands of people lived and whose histories will never be known, and who have basically turned, not just symbolically, but literally became part of the soil of that place. So I feel like partially by her archiving that, she is creating a history for the future. I think that's kind of the way I can see what you said, what you're saying, that she's creating an archive. And
Thank you so much for this conversation. I want to ask a sort of half-formed question about something that wasn't addressed on the panel. And so in part of the installation, there are these clay vessels, which Rana wants to smash. And they're made from the clay, right, that she has sorted and archived and named and all of that. And and I'm sort of describing this for folks who haven't seen it, but there are these, like a ton of electrical wires with these like microchips that are inserted into intentional indentations in all of the vessels, and there they are, and nature sounds are coming up from those, right? And Camilla did a wonderful tour with the class that I brought there, and she explained that looks perfect, thank you. But it sort of looks like a waterfall, and it mimics the waterfall, and this is juxtaposed to the nature images on the other wall. But I'm sitting with, and I'm sort of lingering with this idea that you mentioned, Christina, about the non-communicative aspects, right? And the liminal spaces that are throughout the exhibition. And just wondering what thoughts anybody on the panel might have about that juxtaposition, that tension between the clay and the sort of very natural images, or I guess features of the vessels, and they're made by the clay, and then with this like very visible microchip technology, and it's like it beeps, like a red light, and it like you hear a bird chirping, and it's so juxtaposed, and there's a tension there. So I don't know if you can speak to that.
I'll take a job at it first. And I'm going to cite one of my students, Izzy Digmont, who attended one of the Halsey guides, and I heard their question when they did the tour with Raheleh, and I thought it was a brilliant question. And it was precisely, so they saw this dichotomy between the ceramic, which we associate with this ancient, ancient vessel, ancient material, and then the like super techy cords, right? That are extended. And I loved that observation. And I think for me, part of that juxtaposition also alludes that the ceramic is a technology, right? Like there's a techne in there. There's an intelligence, it's a tool, it's being used. And so there's not that much distance between the cords and what the cords do, and then the technology of the ceramic and the usefulness of the ceramic. But I'm so glad also that you mentioned it, because it's true. It's like one of the coolest parts. It's all cool, but it's like one of the best parts of the interesting parts of the installation, because, and the way the artist describes it, she says in the past, she's exhibited the ceramic pieces so that people could actually touch them. Is that remembering that correctly? Or at least you could like go around them. And for this one, she actually intentionally wanted to create like you can't really touch them. They're on a shelf. So there's still some distance, but there's this curiosity because you want to see what's inside. And of course, that's provoked by the sound, right? Because there's this sound. And so there's this really crazy experience of the sonorous and then the object. And so, yeah, that was my experience of those pieces.
Yeah, that didn't repeat. Yeah, does everyone else want to?
Any final questions? All right. Final comments? Well, thank you so much. I loved this conversation. I really appreciated it. Thank you all for coming and for your questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.